There are so many activities and resources you can create on the LMS platform like we saw in the previous video. In this session, we are going to look at how to add a quiz activity to your course. A quiz could consist of questions of various types, including multiple choice, matching, short answer, and numerical, and the instructor can allow the quiz to be attempted multiple times, with the questions shuffled or randomly selected from the question bank. A time limit may also be set for the quiz. Each attempt is marked automatically, except for essay questions, after which the grade is recorded in the gradebook. The instructor can choose when options like hints, feedback, and correct answers are shown to students. Quizzes may be used for course exams, mini-tests, and reading assignments. Now let's look at how to set up a quiz. First, you must enable Turn Editing On by clicking on the Turn Editing On from either by clicking on the Action menu icon or under the Administration block on your course page, in my case ITS 101-2019A. Then locate the section of the course page that you want to add the quiz activity to. In my case, this section. Now, click on the Add an Activity menu. Then from the dialog box select Quiz. This action takes you to the quiz editing screen. Under the General section of the quiz editing screen, enter a name for the quiz, for example, End of First Semester Exams. In the description area also, you can write the instruction for the exams, such as this. You can use the formatting tools here to format your description properly. Still, under the description, you can click on this checkbox if you want the students to see the description on the course page, or leave it as it is if you want the students to see it only after clicking on the quiz activity link. I will leave mine unchecked for now. Next, clicking on the timing will enable you to time your quiz activity. Here, you can enable when the quiz opens and when it ends. Clicking on this checkbox beside the Enable gives you the chance to set the opening date and time for the quiz. So for this quiz, I'm going to set it to start from 1st October, 2021 at 8 a.m. I can likewise set the end date by clicking on this to enable the Close the Quiz. This will then enable me to set the date and time after which students can no longer take the quiz. I'm going to set this exam to end on the 1st of October, 2021 at 12 p.m. This means that the quiz will be available to the students from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. on 1st October, 2021. Next, you can set the duration of the quiz by enabling this time limit. The default is 0, which means there is no time limit, and that students can take as much time as needed. Setting a time limit can help prevent online quizzes from being too easy since they would be time-bound. For this exam, I am going to set the duration to 1.5 hours, which is equivalent to 90 minutes. Next is when time expires. It is always the case that if the student is actively working on the quiz and the countdown timer reaches 0, their attempt will be automatically submitted at that moment. This setting only affects what happens if the student starts a timed attempt and leaves the attempt before the time expires. There are 3 options as to what will happen when the time limit is up. You can choose your preferred option from the drop-down menu. By default, it is set to open attempts are submitted automatically. This is always the recommended setting since it makes sure that all attempts are submitted and graded once the quiz duration is over. The second option is, there is a grace period when open attempts can be submitted, but no more questions are answered. Choosing this option gives you the chance to add the duration of the grace period, that's, a period during which learners may still be able to submit the quiz even after their time is up. The third and final option is, attempts must be submitted before time expires, or they are not counted. This can also be used to make sure that the students must strictly submit his attempt before the system time them out. Else their marks will not be recorded in the gradebook. I will leave it the default option, open attempts are submitted automatically for now. Next is the grade section. Clicking on the grade here will also give you the option to assign the grade category. This setting controls the category in which this activity's grades are placed in the gradebook. If you have multiple categories in your gradebook, you must then select the particular category you wish the quiz to be placed in. By default, your grade category is set to uncategorized because you don't have any category created yet. Also, you can use the Grade to Pass option to set a passing grade for the quiz. This may be connected with activity completion and conditional activities such that a student will not be able to access a follow-up activity until they have passed the quiz. For now, I am going to leave my default setting as it is. Next is attempts allowed. This simply refers to the number of attempts at a quiz you want your students to have. By default, it is set to unlimited, meaning students can take the quiz as often as they want. For this quiz, I am going to set mine at 2 attempts. That is, I want my student to be able to take it only once. But depending on the nature of the quiz, you can decide to set it to 3, 4, or unlimited attempts. The last setting under grade setting is the grading method. Note that this option is only visible when you have more than one attempt selected in the attempts allowed setting above. The grading method allows you to set how quizzes are scored, especially where the students are allowed to take the quiz multiple times. You can choose from keeping the highest grade, keeping the average of all the grades, keeping the first score, or keeping the latest score. These options are solely based on the lecturer's discretion. It is recommended to set it as the highest grade if you allow more than 2 attempts here. The next section is the layout section. This is where you set up the question layout, that is, the way the quiz would be arranged or laid out and displayed to the students. For longer quizzes, it makes sense to stretch the quiz over several pages by limiting the number of questions per page. When adding questions to the quiz, page breaks will automatically be inserted according to the setting you choose here. By default, it is set to display every question on the same page, but you can click on the drop-down here to choose any of these display options. You can choose to display all questions on one page by selecting Never, all questions on one page. In my case, I am going to set it to display 5 questions per page. You can click on this Show More button to set the navigation method. By default, it is said to be free. That is, students can navigate through the questions freely when taking the quiz. You can also click on this drop-down and choose Sequential. This forces the students to progress through the questions in order, by disallowing them from going back to a previous question or skipping to a later one, unlike the setting it to Free. We shall look at how these 2 options preview later on when previewing the quiz. But for now, I am going to set mine to Free. Next is the question behavior. The shuffle within questions can be used to decide whether you want the system to automatically shuffle the answers to each question anytime a student attempts a quiz. By default, it is set to Yes, which is the recommended setting. Shuffling can be useful in preventing cheating, but watch out for questions with answers like both A and B, or all of the above. Questions containing such alternatives should either be rephrased or not shuffled at all by clicking here and choosing No. But this will, however, mean that all the questions will have their answers not shuffled within. However, you can also set all the questions to shuffle within and disable it for only one question by editing that particular question from the question bank. You can also look at How Questions Behave option. This is the primary way to control the experience a student has as they interact with each question in the quiz. By default, this is set to Deferred Feedback, which is recommended for most types of quizzes. With this, students must enter or provide an answer to each question, and then submit the entire quiz before anything is graded or they get any feedback as well as their scores. This is a typical depiction of what happens in the traditional classroom. Let's take a look at the other options in the drop-down menu. Adaptive mode and adaptive mode with no penalties. These allow students to have multiple attempts at the question before moving on to the next question. This behavior requires that the whether correct box is ticked under during the attempt in the review options section. The adaptive mode will allow the student to have multiple attempts and penalize the student for each wrong answer the students provide, but the adaptive mode with no penalties, on the other hand, will not penalize the student for wrong answers. Interactive with multiple tries is also used for allowing multiple attempts on the same question, perhaps with a grade penalty. Students answer the question and click the check button. If the answer is wrong, the student can click the Try Again button to try a new response. Importantly, the question definition must contain hints that will be shown after each incorrect attempt, though the hint text can be as minimal as an HTML non-breaking space. Once the student has got the question right, they can no longer change their response. Once the student has got the question wrong too many times, they are just graded wrong or partially correct and get shown the feedback. Unless Allow Redo within an attempt is enabled in the question behavior settings of the quiz, they can no longer change their answer. There can be specific feedback after each tries the student makes, in addition to overall feedback about incorrect or correct answers and answer choices. The immediate feedback is also similar to interactive mode in that the student can submit their response immediately during the quiz attempt and get it graded. However, they can only submit one response. They cannot change it later. Immediate feedback with certainty-based marking. About this, the student does not only answer the question, but they also indicate how sure they are that they got the question right. The grading is therefore adjusted by the choice of certainty, so that students have to reflect honestly on their level of knowledge in order to get the best mark. For now, I'm going to proceed with the default option, which is the deferred feedback. Clicking on the Show More link here gives you the each attempt builds on the last. If multiple attempts are allowed and this setting is set to yes, then each new quiz attempt will contain the results of the previous attempt. This allows the student on the new attempt to concentrate on just those questions that were answered incorrectly on the previous attempt. If this option is chosen, then each attempt by a particular student uses the same questions in the same order, independent of randomization settings, and with the same values for questions with random variables. To show a fresh quiz on every attempt, select No for this setting. No is also the default and recommended setting. Next is the Review options. This is where you can manage or control what information gets displayed to students when they review their quiz's past attempts, and during the attempt in adaptive mode. It is a matrix with checkboxes as shown below. The various pieces of information that can be controlled include the attempt, whether correct, marks, specific feedback, general feedback, right answer, and overall feedback. For this quiz, I am going to leave the during the attempt options as default, since I'm using the deferred feedback option. But under the immediately after the attempt option, since I want my students to only see their marks and the overall performance in the quiz, I will uncheck all, leaving the marks and the overall feedback alone. And I will repeat the same for the later, while the quiz is still open, as well as after the quiz is closed. Next is the appearance. The appearance gives you options such as show the user's picture. It gives you the chance to display the user's profile picture for proctoring purposes, and to choose whether a large image or thumbnail will be displayed. By default, is it set to display no image. The decimal places and grades option also determines how many digits will be shown after the decimal separator when the grade is displayed. A setting of 0, for example, means that the grades are displayed as integers. This setting is only used for the display of grades, not for the display or marking of answers. For more options, click on this Show More link, and from here, you can also set the decimal places in question grades. This allows you to have a different display of grades for each question compared to the quiz total. For example, you may see the individual grades per question in decimal, while the total quiz grade shows as a whole number. Also, the show blocks during quiz attempts can be used to control whether blocks are shown on the page during quiz attempts or not. Next is the Safe Exam Browser. The quiz has built-in settings to allow secure exams using the Safe Exam Browser. Safe Exam Browser is offered under a Mozilla public license. The application is available for Windows, macOS and iOS as open-source software. If this is enabled, students will only be able to attempt the quiz if they are using the Safe Exam Browser. That is, students would have to install the Safe Exams browser on their devices before they can take the exams. The browser window won't have a URL or search field, and // navigation and reload can be disabled. Safe Exam Browser cannot be closed until the test is submitted. Switching to other applications is disabled by default, but it's possible to allow the use of specific third-party applications during an exam. Enabling this browser prevents students from searching for answers online, as it disables everything on the user's machine. Activating the general requirement of Safe Exam Browser opens all the settings for using the Safe Exam Browser. You can choose between No, Yes configure manually, Yes use an existing template, Yes upload my config, or Yes use SEB client config. You can always use the Yes configure manually option, as it automatically downloads the browser configuration file for your students. Note, it is only recommended to use this option only when you are sure that all your students have the browser installed on their machines, or in a supervised environment where you have the browser installed on all the machines. Next is the extra restrictions on attempts. One of the most important things to consider when setting up a quiz is to protect your quiz with a password. With the Require Password option, if you specify a password here, say, ABCD, then the quiz participants would be required to first enter the same password before they are allowed to attempt the quiz. Clicking on the Show More Options link gives you other restrictions options such as Require Network Address, where you can restrict access for a quiz to particular subnets on the local area network or internet by specifying a comma-separated list of partial or full IP address numbers. This is especially useful for a proctored, invigilated quiz, where you want to be sure that only people in a certain place can access the quiz. For example, IP addresses such as 192.168.10.1, 192.168, 231.54.211.0/20, etc. With enforced delay between attempts, you can also set a time lapse between the first and second quiz attempts. You can also set a time from seconds to weeks for subsequent attempts after the second attempt. Thus, you might allow a student to take the quiz twice, immediately with no delay, but if they want to improve their score with a third attempt, they are forced to wait a week and use the time space for extra revision. With browser security, the options in this section offer various ways to try to restrict how students may try to cheat while attempting a quiz. If the full screen pop-up with some JavaScript security is selected, the quiz taker is restricted on what they can do while attempting the quiz, which takes place on a web server. The quiz appears in a full-screen pop-up window that covers all the other windows and has no navigation controls. Students are prevented, as far as is possible, from using facilities like copy and paste. Allow quiz to be attempted offline using the mobile app. If enabled, a mobile app user can download the quiz and attempt it offline. Note that a quiz can't be attempted offline if it has a time limit, or if it requires a network address, or uses any question behavior other than deferred feedback, with or without CBM. Experimental fault-tolerant mode. This enables students to take a quiz even when their network is not stable. They can move through the pages of the quiz even if the server is not available. In this case, their choice of answers is stored locally until the network or server is active. Allowed browser exam keys. In this box, you enter the browser exam keys for safe browser versions that are allowed to access the quiz. If nothing is entered in the box, it means no exact exam key is required for the quiz. Once again, I will leave all the settings under this Show More as it is. Next is the overall feedback. This is the text feedback that is shown to the student after attempting a quiz. The type of text shown would be dependent on the grade the student got. You can set as many or as few grade boundaries and their respective feedbacks as you wish. The form allows you few ranges at first, but you can add more by clicking the Add 3 Fields to Form button underneath. This option can be left as it is. Next is the Common Module Settings. On the Settings page for many modules, there is a section called Common Module Settings. These settings are the same for all activities and resources. It allows you to determine whether and how groups are used with the activity or resource. With availability, this availability setting has about two possible options, namely, show on course page and hide from students. The ID number, this setting is not required. It is used to identify assignments for grade calculations. Then for the group mode, groups must be assigned to a grouping first. A grouping is a collection of groups. If selected, the group settings apply to a specific grouping of groups. From the drop-down, the No Groups options applies to the entire class. For the separate groups also, students must be assigned to groups first. If selected, students interact privately within their group. Instructors can review students' activity by group or all participants. With visible groups, students must be assigned to groups first. If selected, students can edit only within their group, but can view the work of other groups. Instructors can review students' activity by group or all participants. Now, with Add Group or Grouping Access Restriction, where groups are used, you can restrict an activity or resource to only students assigned to specific groups or groupings. For this exam, I am going to leave mine as the default setting. Restrict access. This is one of the most important aspects of setting up a quiz. This is where you can put access restrictions on the quiz. Clicking on the Add Restrictions button gives you options such as activity completion, which requires students to complete, or not complete, another activity before they can take the quiz. The date option can also be used to prevent access until, or from, a specified date and time. Next, the grade, when set, will require students to achieve a specified grade before they will be allowed to take this quiz. With the user profile also, it controls access based on fields within the student's profile. And finally, the restriction set adds a set of nested restrictions to apply complex logic. For this attempt, I am going to set a date restriction such that students can attempt the only from 10th October 2021 to at 9 a.m. For this attempt, I am going to set a date restriction such that students can attempt the only from 10th October 2021 to at 9 a.m. and before 11 a.m. on 10th October 2021 is shown. Next is the activity completion. The activity completion allows the instructor to set completion criteria in a specific activity settings. The criterion might be viewing, receiving a certain score, or the student marking it as complete. Under activity completion, we have completion tracking. If enabled, activity completion is tracked, either manually or automatically, based on certain conditions. Multiple conditions may be set if desired. If so, the activity will only be considered complete when all conditions are met. A tick next to the activity name on the course page indicates when the activity is complete. Expect completed on. This setting specifies the date when the activity is expected to be completed. The tags are used to add keywords that can be used to identify an activity or resource. This can be left blank. The tags are expect completed on. This setting specifies the date when the activity is expected to be completed. The tags are used to add keywords that can be used to identify an activity or resource. This can be left blank, unless you want to tag your quizzes for easy identification. Finally, competencies. Here, you can edit and choose the type of evidence that students should provide to accept an activity as complete. This can also be left blank. After setting up, select Save and Return to Course or Save and Display to save the settings for the quiz. I will choose Save and Display to save mine and display it. Next, we will look at how to add questions to the quiz or exam that we have created. Expect completed on. This setting specifies the date when the activity is expected to be completed. The tags. Tags are used to add keywords that can be used to identify an activity or resource. This can be left blank, unless you want to tag your quizzes for easy identification. Finally, competencies. Here, you can edit and choose the type of evidence that students should be left blank. Finally, competencies. Here, you can edit and choose the type of evidence that students should provide to accept an activity as complete. This can also be left blank. After setting up, select Save and Return to Course, or Save and Display to save the settings for the quiz. I will choose Save and Display to save mine and display it. Next, we will look at how to add questions to the quiz or exam that we have created.